So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, Dario Mescia. I've known him for a few years, originally met him at Henry Stewart, and he's got a very compelling presentation on the ups and downs of HIPAA and PII at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So Dario, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks for the intro, John. Thanks everybody for coming to this riveting discussion on HIPAA and how that applies to the world of DAM. As John told you, my name is Dario. I'm an art director and I handle the creative ops at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. So I'll start really quick by just talking a little bit about who we are. Our acronym is CHOP, so you might hear me say CHOP a bunch, but we are the first pediatric hospital in America. We're also one of the top ranked in America. We're also the largest pediatric health network in the nation, and we're a world-renowned leader in patient care research and education. And that's a little bit about us. And today we're here to talk about HIPAA and the role that plays in the DAM. So we'll start at the very beginning. I'm sure if you're tuning into this and you don't know what HIPAA is, I would simply ask, why are you tuning into this? Because HIPAA is not very exciting. In fact, it's quite a nuisance. But just to do my due diligence, I will tell you that HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it was put in place to set federal standards for protecting patients' health information. And the thing with HIPAA that makes it so challenging in the world of DAM is the vagueness of it. You know, it's written by lawyers, blah, blah, blah. So as you see, I'm going to drill down into HIPAA and you'll kind of see why it poses such a challenge because of its vagueness. And we'll start with the privacy rule. This required any entity governed by HIPAA to put safeguards in place to protect the privacy of PHI, which is protected health information. So the next logical question is, what is PHI? PHI is individually identifiable health information. Are you sensing a pattern here? What is individually identifiable health information? It's this stuff. It relates to the past, present, future, physical, mental health, or condition of an individual. Very, very vague. And this is the challenge with HIPAA, is every institution views it a little differently. Some are more risk averse, some are more risk prone. So people have interpretations of exactly what PHI is. And that's why it is very important that you know the answer to this question, which is, do you know how your institution defines PHI? If you don't know the answer to this question, just leave now, go find out. Like, this is the most important question you need to know the answer to in anything you're doing in the world of DAM, because you can't make a decision about anything unless you know the answer to this question. And this also doesn't mean, like, what does my boss think PHI is? What does the marketing director think PHI is? Like, these answers need to come from legal, they need to come from InfoSec. Like, you need to know what PHI is according to your institution. And examples I'll give, when we were first exploring our DAM, trying to figure out what we wanted to use, see how other institutions are doing things, this is some of the questions that came up. And we saw a pretty wide variety of interpretations, ranging from the very liberal, you know, we're okay with risk interpretation, which was metadata that was identifiable, names, conditions, ages, things like that. Those make life a little easier. But then there's also very conservative interpretations, which use these 18 identifiers of PHI. And as you can see, I pulled one of them out because it's a little bit important when you're dealing with a DAM. Full face photos and comparable images. According to the more conservative interpretations of HIPAA and PHI, a photograph of a patient is PHI. Doesn't matter if there's metadata attached to it, doesn't matter if there's anything else attached, just a photograph is PHI. And this becomes important if you're like us and you photograph your own patients and you tell your patients' stories. And by telling their stories, you tell the story of your institution. That kind of interpretation would really, really affect how you're going to make decisions. But let's say you don't photograph your own patients. You might be sitting there thinking, well, we use stock for all our stuff, so what's the big deal? Well, think of this. Do you ever have events? Do those events ever raise money for a particular cause? Do you ever invite patients to those events? Do you ever have signage up at those events? Do you photograph those? Do those pictures end up in the dam? Because if they do, no matter your interpretation, you could be putting your institution at risk. Because even if you have the very liberal side and you're saying, well, we're just going to put the pictures up, but we're not going to tag them or anything, you still could have a patient at an event for cancer with a cancer sign behind them. And that patient could be wearing a name tag. So you may tell just by looking at a picture that you have this guy, Timmy, who's at this cancer awareness event. So this is Tim, he's a patient and he's got cancer and he's a patient of ours. So you have to keep those things in mind when you're dealing with HIPAA and you're dealing with a dam. So I'm coming back to this question again, because it's the most important thing imaginable from this whole presentation. Do you know how your institution defines PHI? All right, so that's the fun. This is what HIPAA is, this is what PHI is. Now we'll get more into how that affects your dam and what you do with your dam. So we'll start by saying that the dam, the purpose of the dam when you're dealing with HIPAA is a little different than what it is in most of the other areas that use dam. And the main goal of the dam when dealing with HIPAA is not simply to organize your assets and streamline their delivery. The main goal of the dam is to secure those assets and protect them. So how do I do that? How do I protect my assets? The first thing you'll do, the easiest thing you'll do, is you'll require your vendors to sign a business associates agreement, also known as a BAA. This is, the legal blah, blah, blah definition of it. But the gist of what a BAA does is it brings your vendor under HIPAA as well. So if there's a breach of HIPAA and it's the vendor's fault, they're liable 100% legally, financially for that breach. It doesn't fall on you because that vendor is also being brought under HIPAA. That's what a BAA does in essence. But there's a much, much larger thing you have to kind of undertake when you're dealing with HIPAA, you're dealing with PHI, and you're dealing with a dam. And it's a complete shift in mindset. And you have to, this is a must. You must adopt the mindset of security first, functionality second. It hurts my heart to say it because it goes against everything I believe. I'm a user experience guy to the core. But you have to think about security before you think about usability and before you think about functionality. It means that you're not just asking why, but you're also asking how. Has to be asked for every decision you make in the dam. So what does that mean? Like I said, security has to be the driving force behind every decision you make. And I'll go through a few examples from our world and just things to think about in general. So you look at something like on-premise versus SaaS. This is a decision you're going to have to make with your dam. And you're probably going to have a preference. But you can't just say, this is my preference because of this. You have to look at the full scope. So on-premise, the benefits of on-premise is you don't have to deal with HIPAA that much. You don't have to deal with BAAs that much because your team and your IT department are managing the system and they're managing the assets. So what it does, in essence, is it opens up your pool of vendors to most vendors. However, you're now dealing internally with your IT department who will never, ever, ever prioritize your dam over systems that are directly involved in patient care. It's a huge, huge sacrifice you'd have to make going on-prem because you're never going to get things done like that. You're always going to be at the mercy of your IT department and when they have time. Also, a lot of times with on-premise sort of setups, you're going to have a little less flexibility as far as being able to access the dam on different systems, different devices. You may have a certain amount of firewalls you have to go through that are going to start to affect performance. You have a lot of those things to think about when you're looking at on-premise. And then there's SAAS. The beauty of SAAS is they're going to prioritize your system, because if they don't, they're not going to be your customer anymore. And they're going to lose all that money. You also, many times, you're going to have a little more flexibility. Instead of having to deal with quite as many firewalls, you'll probably have more two-factor type authentications, things like that. However, when you deal with SaaS, HIPAA is a huge thing now, and the BAA is a requirement. And I don't know about everybody watching this, but if you've ever Googled HIPAA compliant DAM, good luck. There's 5 or 6 of them, maybe. And what you're in essence sacrificing with a SaaS option is functionality, because when you're limiting your systems to choose from to a handful, you're really sacrificing, you're taking a lot of choice out of the mix by limiting yourself to a select few. So another way security is going to be important is in permissions and workflows, because when you think of HIPAA and you think of protecting PHI, it's not just protecting it from leaving your world and going out to other people. It's also protecting it from inside your own world. If you're a doctor on an elevator and you spoke with a patient, you can't just hang out on the elevator and talk to your buddy about what you did with that patient, even though they work for you, or you don't work in the same place as you. It's still confidential within your walls. So you have to have a system that can permission very granularly. And you have to have workflows that allow, that are very flexible. So you can set up the proper permissions and the proper workflows. And you want to write use cases very specific to those. And they may not be sexy, but you need to tell the most complex stories you can think of so that you can see if these systems you're looking at can handle what you're looking to do. And an example of the permission one that we put together, it was all around digital signatures. So the CEO signs their name, that becomes a digital image that's then used on direct mail pieces, letters, things like that. So the use case we wrote up is we have about 430-ish digital signatures. They're all going to live in the DAM, and all of those signatures are going to be open to marketing, and they're going to be open to the foundation, because those two groups are doing the bulk of the work involving those. However, each individual signature also has a creator who made that signature. And each of those individual signatures must be available to that creator and probably that creator's assistant. So in essence, what you have are 430 some assets that are open to two groups, but then at the asset and at the user level, those permissions have to be able to trump the group permission. So that's the level of permissioning that we needed when looking for a DAM. And that was a use case we worked up. On the workflow side, we also wrote up one of our more complicated ones where we have what we call patient ambassadors. So we have big events, and what we'll do is we'll photograph some actual patients, and those patients will be the ambassadors for that event. They're the ones who are promoting it. They're the ones who are, telling people their stories to help raise money and get support for the events. And our foundation has existing relationships with those families and with those patients. Therefore, they want control over those assets in essence. So what we do is those assets go into the system. They're owned by a person. And anytime somebody wants to download one of those assets, they have to tell us why. And then they have to start an approval workflow. And what that will do is automatically shoot a notification out to that person in the foundation saying, so-and-so wants to use this picture for this. Is that cool? And then if they approve it, then they're allowed to download it. But what we have to do is have that workflow be able to work with different people. So it's not everything shooting to an admin or everything shooting to this one person in the foundation. You might have 2,000 assets here who are going to go to this person. 5,000 assets here are going to be managed by these people. So that's the kind of workflow we had to be able to assemble and be able to find a system that could handle. Now we're going to get a little more in the weeds with questions you need to ask, which kind of shows you how deep you have to dive and how much you have to constantly be thinking about security. Do all features live in the DAM? So what does that mean? That means you might see a feature like AI, facial recognition. You're like, that's great. I'd love to put it in the DAM. However, remember I said before, you need to ask how. How is the question you need to just keep throwing out. And so when you talk to your vendor about putting something in place like AI or facial recognition, you need to ask them how it's done. And what they need to tell you is, did they build that themselves within their platform? Or are they leveraging a third-party system or a third-party functionality like Amazon or Google or Microsoft? They all have facial recognition that exists. And a lot of these systems just leverage that, which is fine if they're taking that functionality and bringing it into the dam. What happens many times is they'll take assets from the dam and shoot them out to that functionality. And in doing that, your assets in essence are leaving your secure HIPAA environment. We encountered that with our first dam we put in place. There was a feature that allowed the users to preview PDFs within the dam if it was more than a page. But in early stages of configuration, we found out that that feature lived outside of the secure HIPAA environment using a third-party app, and therefore we had to turn it off. And this is where sacrifice comes into play, compromise comes into play, because we had to sacrifice the user experience and now force our users to download PDFs to get past page 1 if you wanted to preview it, because security had to come first. So you have to ask how with everything. And you also have to never forget about metadata. And it's easy to forget about sometimes. It's the driving force behind the dam. You hear so many presentations here about the importance of metadata, and they're all true. Metadata is king. However, it's very easily forgotten when you think about security. So if you think about an asset, I'm a designer, I'm pulling a picture down to put in a brochure. So I download the picture, I put it in my InDesign file, it gets approved, I package that file, I send it off to the printer. If you're not thinking about metadata when you're putting your dam together, what you possibly just did was gave PHI to a vendor you don't have a BAA with, because metadata is sticky. You pull that asset down, that metadata comes down with it. And if that metadata contains PHI and that PHI image just got packaged and sent to your vendor, there's a lot of possibilities for some lawsuits happening there. So what we built into our system was every single asset that's downloaded, it doesn't even matter what's attached to it. We just did it across the board to be as secure as possible. Metadata is stripped from it on download, with the exception of maybe 2 fields. I think copyright's open and creator or something like that. So you can never forget it's there, because there's a good chance it's going to contain something that could get you in trouble if you forget that it's there. And the last thing I'm just going to talk about is always think ahead. So you want to think ahead, and you also don't want to get stuck in a way of thinking that like, this is what a dam is and this is what a dam always is. You have to think about what it can be, and especially when it regards to like security. So for me, I'm a control freak. When you deal with HIPAA, you have to be. And the only way you can really control assets is if you never let them go. So one of the things that we're trying, road mapping with our dam is we never, ever want anybody to be able to download an asset from the dam. It's the only way to truly control them. However, that functionality doesn't exist anywhere, because what we want to be able to do is have the only way to access these assets be through integrations, whether it be Word or PowerPoint, InDesign, Illustrator, all of these systems, Drupal. We basically only want people to be able to access those by going through an integration. That way we know that so-and-so using an InDesign integration for such and such a file on such and such a day just linked up this picture box with this picture in the dam. That's the only way we can truly control the assets and know everything that's going on. So you always have to be thinking ahead. You have to be thinking of ways you can make your dam better, but better in a secure way. So I'm going to leave it at that and just go over the key takeaways. There's only 2. I tried to keep it easy for everybody, but they're 2 big ones. You need to know how your institution defines PHI. If you get nothing out of this presentation except for that, it's been successful. You have to know how your institution defines PHI. And you have to protect your assets like they're your kids. So think about if you're sending your 8-year-old kid off to sleepover camp or something for the first time ever, you're not just going to be like, well, Sally said that they're reputable, so that's cool. you know you're going to be on Google looking up that camp. You know you're going to find the names of every single person working there. You're going to hop on their Facebook feed. You're going to hop on Twitter. Like, you're going to do your work to make sure that your kids are going to be safe at that camp. You need to take that mindset and use that same one in your dam. And with that, I'll thank everybody for listening. I hope this was exciting for you. And let's open it up for questions.
Okay, thanks, Dario. That was awesome. It never ceases to amaze me how scary your world is from a security perspective. Yeah, so we got some pretty good questions. I'd like to review a few of those with you and get your take on it.
All right.
The first question I got for you is, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. So when you were looking for your current platform, I know you had a couple others, or at least one before that. Did you feel like any DAM, whether it's a departmental, mid-range, or enterprise, any of those came close to fitting your needs? Or did you feel like you had to pick one and then really work on configuring it to cover all these requirements you laid out?
Well, we didn't find any dam that fit every need, but we found some that came close. We found one that came really, really close and was ridiculously expensive, so they just went away. We found another one that could do a good bit of the stuff we were looking for, but they weren't willing to sign the BAA and they weren't HIPAA compliant, so they had to go away. But the one we settled on is highly configurable, which was very necessary for us, and allowed us to do most of what we needed to do. But we also found that they were a good partner because they were open to our ideas. There's a lot of people, a lot of vendors in the DAM world. It's kind of like, this is how we do things, and that's how we do things. The vendor we ended up finding, they're very much a partner in this than kind of a vendor, and they're open to the ideas that we've been posing to them about trying to be more secure and trying to find different ways of doing things. And they're excited about it. And that was one of the things that drove us towards them when we chose them.
Okay. Got a question. Any tips on getting stakeholder buy-in given your unique requirements?
Stakeholder buy-in's a fun one. It took me 13 years to get stakeholder buy-in. What I can say in my world, it took convincing our creative director that it was important. And it was just trying to find something that she could relate to. I kept pitching, we need an image library. We need an image library to organize these. This started before I knew a DAM even existed, but she started to see the importance when she saw the amount of images we had and things like that. And just the amount of time it took and the amount of resources it took to do searches for images based on institutional knowledge of individuals and folder structure. But what really, really sold her was when we got into the part of our world that excited her the most, which was video, and the workload for video was ramping up a lot. And when I kind of talked with her about how a DAM could make our video projects easier to do, not just for us, but for outside vendors we used, that's kind of what got her sold. And then at that point, it was just, you just have to find champions and make it as big as you can. So for us, the things that pushed it over the edge was getting the creative director on board, but then we also found the foundation was very much on board with the idea of a DAM. Internal communication was excited about the idea, research communication. So we started finding other departments throughout the enterprise that were excited about this idea. And then suddenly all of them were talking to IT about this project that we proposed. And it became a much bigger thing in the institution. And that was sort of what finally pushed it over the top.
Oh, excellent. You mentioned AI before and the issue with having to send that stuff outside the enterprise and potentially being out of compliance. Did you ever find a solution to that for your environment?
We aren't using that at the moment in our system. We're looking into it now. I'm pretty sure that the solution we're on, we're able to do what we need to do. I think they leverage another application, but I think they brought it into their world. But we haven't gotten into those in-depth discussions yet.
Okay. And what kind of methods are you using to train users on your unique requirements?
So we have a couple methods, but a lot of it is just me or our librarian, who's our systems analyst, training people. But we also put some documentation together that kind of talks about what the different buttons do, what this does, how do you do this? When you go to download, this is what comes up. So we have that documentation put together. We also had to work with IT. They actually put together a few scripts for the help desk in case people have questions. They're never going to call IT, because even if they did, like, IT can really only answer like 2 questions for them. So for the most part, they're going to get punted to us. We also created a dedicated email address just for the DAM. So DAM admin email address. So if people have questions, they'll email that address and that'll go to me and it'll go to our system admin.
Okay.
But
do you also
that's
did you also have an audit function to go along with that to make sure the people are following these policies and the training?
Well, the thing about the policies is we haven't given a lot of people the opportunity to do much in the system. So general users, all they can do is search, filter, and download. They're not putting things in the system. The only people tagging are the librarians. So there's only about 2 or 3 people in our entire institution who are actually tagging assets. We're trying to grow that staff, but we wanted to keep that really, really close to the cuff. We didn't want just the Wild West out there with people putting things in the system. So it all funnels through the DAM team. And eventually we're going to open it up. We have put governance in place. We don't have a very good way to police that yet, which is one of the main reasons we're still funneling everything through us. And we haven't reached the full scope of enterprise yet either. We're like slowly trickling it out.
Mhm.
But that's definitely going to be one of the challenges when we get there is auditing completely. But the hope is that we're going to be able to grow staff in the DAM team rather than allow a lot of that to happen outside of the DAM team, because I think that'll keep the auditing much, much easier.
Okay. And I think you mentioned this, but are you stripping all metadata out of images, IPTC, XF, all that, with the few exceptions of like copyright?
Yep, there's just a few fields in IPTC. I think it's literally copyright and creator. I think those are the only 2 we're leaving. Our librarian would know for sure which ones we're keeping, but just about everything.
Okay. And then just one of my questions. I don't think you really touched on like photo releases and things like that much, but do you keep those in the same system, or are they referenced to some other system?
So our system is, we have a BAA with our vendor, HIPAA compliance, but we're also doing a quasi on-prem version of it. It's in AWS, but it's an AWS space that our IT team manages. So because of that, we have a little more flexibility as to what goes in there. So our consents are in the DAM. They're linked up with the assets that they're related to. And yeah.
So you can't be in the cloud, but they can. That's what I just heard.
Well, if they control that cloud, it leaves a little more leeway for us.
Sure. And I think this is our last question. So if theoretically, if there was a breach of PHI somewhere and images got out into the jungle, as we sometimes refer to in our world, do you have ways of tracing that back since you are stripping metadata?
We have some ways of strip. I mean, it all depends. If an asset is downloaded and is sitting on someone's computer, we don't have tons of ways to know who they've sent it to at that point, but we have share capabilities built into the system. We also, nobody can just download something without saying why. So every download that's recorded is always going to have a why with it, whether it's for a brochure, whether it's for a website, whether it's something going to a media outlet, whether it has a job number attached to it. All of those, there has to be a reason why you're pulling this down. So we're going to know who downloaded this image, when they did it, and why they did it. But one of the reasons I'm trying to lock things down completely is I don't like when assets live on computers, because then they're reused for things and I don't necessarily know they're used for that. And sometimes they're sent to places and I don't know when they're sent to that. But I should say too, one of the other features we build into the system is if anybody shares assets outside of the CHOP environment, so if it goes to an email address that doesn't end with chop.edu, InfoSec, or the admin, and I believe InfoSec, is going to get daily reports of every asset that's gone outside of our environment, who sent it, where it was sent to, just as a way we can kind of keep track of that sort of stuff.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it for our time here. You know, Dario, it's always great to get back in touch with you and hear how your journey has been since that first day when you were talking about it all in the theoretical at lunch that back in
Yeah.
New York.